There's been discussion about the death of the enterprise, at least for me, since 2011, when Tim Crawford and Jan Wiersma and I did a presentation at a conference in London on the very topic. And our topic was pretty blunt, that the enterprise data center was dead. There's a lot of ways to interpret that. The most obvious one is that it's dead. But from our perspective, it was dead in the sense that it wasn't a growth industry anymore, right? Not to say that all data centers are going away. So hopefully, as we walk through my 15 or so slides this morning, you can each take from it what you believe, of course, but you can also hopefully take from it the things that you believe apply to where you are, either from a supplier standpoint or a user standpoint of data center capacity. So that's the truth. I love this stuff. And if somebody gave me a ticket and said, build data centers till the end of time, I would do it. I love data centers. I love what they do for the business. I love how they work. I love what comes out of them. But honestly, why are we still talking about them? Well, there's a good reason we're talking about them. It's because data centers run some of the most important businesses in the world today. Companies like Google and Facebook and eBay and PayPal and LinkedIn and Amazon and Microsoft, et cetera, et cetera. Many other companies that rely on data centers to be successful every day. But for most of us, are data centers what make the company successful? Well, it depends. The basic premise is that owning a DC is easy, right? I don't have any other explanation for that than that this is true, because a lot of us own data centers and we generally don't do a very good job of it. So we must assume it's easy. And if you haven't seen Diane Alber's comics before, she's pretty good, and she used to send them out, I don't know, and ask people for comments. I don't know if she still does that. And I had the privilege of filling in the empty voice balloons a couple of times for her. So digitization, why is that important? Well, I'm talking about digitization because your ability to respond to what I believe every company is going to require you to respond to starts with your data center and what comes out of your data center. Whether your data center is cloud capacity or colo capacity or fixed capacity in your own building, your ability to provide your business with the response they need for digitization will come from your data center. So opportunity and risk. Digitization is effectively considered mandatory, right? Well, by the way, that was just my definition. I'm sure there are other better definitions for what digitization is. I made that up when I was doing this. That's how I see it. So digitization is considered mandatory to me in the sense that I would say, and I would repeat, and I would argue with anyone, that if you're not on a path or already a digital platform as a company, 5 or 6 years from now, you are likely going to be dying as a brand. So I consider that fairly serious. Agility is critical. How many people think a data center itself is agile? How you work in a data center might be agile. How you use data center capacity might be agile. The ability to rack and roll into a data center might be considered agile. The ability to rack and roll into any data center in the world when you need to might be agile. But is building a data center for your company in their basement or in their parking lot agile? I guess that depends, right? I've never been very good at writing 3-year business plans because they never last more than about 9 months. How many people here have built a data center with less than a 10-year lifespan expectation? Can you call a business plan a 10-year business plan? Just something to think about. Well, is there anything in there that's worth covering still? Isn't agile? They're still required. And investing in static structures might limit agility, as I've been discussing. Modern assumptions. Key benefits of public cloud, right? You guys probably know most of these. Agility, speed, scale, distribution, only as much as you need when you need it. How many people here have heard about the company that's got a data center that they spent 100 million, 300 million, 500 million on, and it's 30% full. And it's been 30% full for years. You know what a cost per megawatt for a decent build for, let's say, an enterprise data center at tier 3? Anybody want to just take a number for me? Anyone? Anyone? Don Beatty? Anyone? Anyone? John in the back there? Anyone? Anyone? So let's just pick a number. Let's say for the average enterprise, if they do a decent job and they build their own data center, they can do it for about 8 million a megawatt. What does 8 million a megawatt mean? Well, generally speaking, when we throw the number around, it means all in, when I have a megawatt worth of data center built, it's cost me $8 million to build it. So if I build a 10 megawatt data center, that's $8 million each, that's an $80 million data center. If I have 3 megawatts in it, after 5 years, do the math. I'm not very good at math. I don't want to try to do the math. But it's pretty bad. And it's nowhere near $8 million a megawatt anymore. Because no matter what you say you spent on it, what matters is what you're using it for. And that's what your cost per megawatt is. So unless you can say to your business that I built a $8 million megawatt data center and I'm using 75 or 80% of it consistently, then you are probably spending twice as much as the next best colo provider, or certainly an equivalent of compute and capacity cloud provider might be charging. So I'm just trying to confuse you guys. That's the same exact list. I just mixed the words up, right? So key demands on data center, they're all the same. So how do you do these things? How do you get agility? How do you get better physical security? How do you get good physical security when you're in a shared building and you've got a data center on the 4th floor? How do you get good physical security when you've got a couple of containers in the parking lot? Is that comparable, do you think, is that comparable to what Oracle would provide, or to what Google would provide, or Microsoft, or Equinix, or anybody else in the data center space? Chances are probably not. As a data center and cloud guy, one of the things that annoys me the most is people saying, oh, I don't want to go to the cloud because it's not secure. I can tell you it's way more secure than the average enterprise data center. So if you can't attribute all of these things to your data center strategy, which may include having some enterprise capacity, but it doesn't have to, if you can't attribute those things to your data center strategy, then you're doing it wrong. So trends that are influencing a drive to the edge. These are just some of the obvious ones. And you could pick another half dozen of the acronyms du jour. But all of them are real. I mean, yesterday we spent the better part of the day talking about edge and edge computing and what that means, how to get to it, why it might be important to your business, why it is an obvious trend in the industry, and what are the things that are driving it, and so on and so on and so on. If your data center is in your building, and that's where you've spent all your money, and your building is in Omaha, Florida, doesn't make any difference, that's your edge. And it's your edge for apps that need 5 or 10 milliseconds, whatever the circle is around that. And then beyond that, it's whatever the edge is at 100 milliseconds and 50 milliseconds, and whatever you can provide to customers with that latency. Well, I can tell you that the average person talking about the edge today isn't talking about applications that are delivered at 200 milliseconds. They're talking about applications that are delivered in less than 10, even less than 5 milliseconds. So if your data center is in Omaha, and that's where you've put most of your capacity, how many customers are you getting to at 5 milliseconds? Not very many. So again, it doesn't mean that you don't need a data center in Omaha. Maybe you do. But you definitely need a partner to help you get to the rest of your customers. And if you're going to go to the edge, which I argue almost every company will need to, if you're going to go to the edge, if you're going to go digital, then you're going to need a partner to help you do that. So drivers for owning. This is actually, some of these things are actually real. I'm not making them up to make myself feel better or make you guys feel better. Keeping your data close, right? There's a lot of arguments. In fact, if Joe Cava were here this morning, he would agree with me, but he would hate it. And that's the fact that the average enterprise still doesn't want to move its data, at least the biggest part of its data, into the public cloud. So the public cloud wants to try to figure out how to get closer to the data. There's good reasons for that, right? You move it to the public cloud, and if you do have things that you're still doing in your data center, and it relies on that data, that means you now have to either use the data from the public cloud, which might have performance problems for your applications that you have still in your data center, or you have to replicate the data, which means now you're paying for it to be stored twice, or a third time or a fourth time, depending on your DR strategy and replication strategy, et cetera. So obviously that's problematic. Beyond that, keeping your data close is one of those things where it's like, well, it's kind of the last thing that gives you a little bit of freedom. Because once you put your data into a public cloud, it's pretty much going to stay there. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you just have to make a realization that that's the case. Protection from partners, maybe. Those partners could be partners, they could be vendors, they could be customers, they could be partner vendors. But having your own capacity sometimes means that you have a little bit better independence. Data center is or can be core to your business. It can be. I mean, I'm a big advocate for IT not being a cost center, right? In fact, I would be less than humble to say I'm famous for it. In my own mind, I'm famous for it. The saying of IT wasn't created to reduce the cost of IT. And that's how many IT organizations, unfortunately, are still viewed. And if you continue to maintain an IT organization with that model of being a cost center, then owning a data center is never going to be this. And it's probably never going to be that. But if you are driving innovation or leading the change to digitization for your business, then owning a data center is got a higher likelihood of being core to what it is you do. So if you really believe that you have to sell generators and air conditioning units to private enterprise, or if you really believe as a private enterprise that you need to own a data center because that's what makes you better, then you better figure out how to help your bosses do those things. So what is ownership? I use ownership and a lot of people, so maybe I should find a different word, right? Because a lot of people question what I mean by ownership. What I mean by ownership is like, well, what happens when you take charge of a puppy? Do you put it in plastic wrap at night? Do you just leave it outside and hope the hawks don't come for it? What do you do when you get a puppy? You give it shots. If it needs to be fixed, you need to get it fixed. You take it for walks. You pick up its poop. You worry about how it gets older. You worry about whether it goes upstairs when you don't want it to. You worry about whether it craps on the floor. You have ownership of that puppy. When you buy a car, do you have to take it for an oil change? Do you get it car washed? Do you buy insurance? That's ownership, right? It's a set of responsibilities associated with maintaining that thing or animal or whatever it is. So when I think about a data center, I think about it from an ownership standpoint. I think about the whole damn thing. How do I own this from talking to the executive team about how this data center or a data center fits into their strategy? What would they want from it? Do they share the same vision for how a data center might impact company business that I do? If they don't, but they still believe a data center is important, how do I take what they think into my design strategy or into my capacity management strategy, which might include my design strategy and my partner strategy and my cloud strategy? So the price of greatness, I'd never heard this from Winston Churchill before. There's a lot of quotes that are attributed to Winston that aren't actually his, but hopefully that's actually his. But to me, how we own what we do makes the difference between whether we're successful or not, right? I asked my dad once, it's the weirdest thing. I asked my dad once when I was, just before I bought my first car, I said, because he was talking to me about how, kids don't seem to maintain their cars and they break down more and they don't worry about them as much and everything. I said, well, that doesn't make any sense, Dad. Kids have less money. You'd think they would take better care of their cars so they wouldn't have to spend money. Well, I found out quickly that I was one of those kids, and I didn't understand that logic, even though I had expressed that logic to my own dad. But maturity around what you believe you're responsible for and what a data center can be or should be for your business is a big part of making sure that you can be a better owner of that data center. So we've talked about most of these things, and the main thing is that from all of this, I guess all of those are important, but a living strategy, right? Your data center, if you think about your data center, and we go back to the point I made about a 15-year or 10-year business plan relative to being a data center versus a traditional written business plan, then in order for anything to be successful as far as that ownership is concerned, it has to be living, right? It has to be a part of a living plan for what your company does, right? Some of the things that make that a little bit easier, again, if you've decided that owning data center capacity is part of what you should be doing, then some of the things that have made that a little bit easier are things like modularity. The ability to build only what you need when you need it in much better and more manageable increments. And it doesn't take away the responsibility for planning, for managing people, for managing the site, for managing corporate sustainability, for managing the access to additional cable or copper when you need it, or fiber. It doesn't change the kind of power you get delivered. All of that still applies. But if you've managed to figure that out in the first increment of capacity that you built, then certainly modularity can really help in giving you some flexibility for how you own. So that if you do end up building 2 instead of 10 megawatts, and the other 8 end up going into edge data centers or cloud data centers or co-location data centers that better support your customers or better support your growth needs, then so be it. Your data center strategy is where you have compute, not just what kind of data center you build for yourself. So assumptions and realities, we all have a CFO, right? The cloud folks love to say that the whole point of going into cloud is it's all OpEx. Well, I don't know how many people in here have ever been responsible for going to their CFO for a large project? Hands? Right? So how many times has the CFO said either of these two things? One, Mark, how do you write that down over the longest period of time over CapEx? Right? If you're going to give me OpEx, can you guarantee that it's going to be roughly the same dollar amount every month? So that's, if you don't know that, if that's not been part of your job and you're selling to people where that's part of their job, that's what they hear, right? So cloud is not necessarily an obvious answer from a CFO standpoint. And even if it is, when things are rolling nicely, when things aren't rolling nicely, the first thing they do is they call up and they go, hey, Mark, you know that email stuff we moved out to the cloud, and how much are we paying for that every month? And after I explain, then she says, do you think you could do it cheaper? It doesn't matter what I could be doing. It doesn't matter what my skill set or my team's skill set could be used for. The only thing that matters is right now, we don't have a lot of extra money, and can I save some money by you digging ditches for me again? So that's a reality in the data center space. Thank you. Application type determines value from the cloud. So when you look at your set of applications and you're making decisions about whether to keep or sell or lease or borrow or do all of the above, then you have to do a really strong inventory of your application base. And for most companies, most traditional companies that have been around for more than 15 years, that have got a set of applications that make up the gamut of 100% of your applications, there are probably going to be 10 or 15% in today's world that are immediate, logical for public cloud from a cost basis and from an opportunity basis. What are some of the costs and opportunities? Well, costs and opportunities are if I have 3 data centers and I need to provide application capacity to 12 different countries, it doesn't make sense for me to put a rack in 12 different data centers and try to manage that myself. That's an obvious opportunity for a cloud-designed app, right? If I have an app, though, that supports the 100 people that work in the company that do finance, and that application uses 4 servers Monday through Friday, 3 weeks out of the month, and Monday through Thursday on the 4th week, and only needs 1 extra server on Friday of the 4th week, that's not a cloud obvious app. It doesn't mean you can't put it in the cloud. It doesn't mean you shouldn't put it in the cloud. But if you're looking for what the priorities are, if you're looking for financial versus opportunity versus risk mitigation, et cetera, those are the 2 spectrums. You're looking for apps where the cloud benefits are scale, elasticity, location independence, resiliency based on design in the cloud, et cetera. For those other apps, not so obvious. Then it becomes one of those decisions at an enterprise level of, do we just want to get rid of the apps because I'd rather have the IT people working on things that are core to our enterprise? And that's not necessarily a bad call, but it's just you have to do that measure. So the bottom there is a link. You don't have to try to memorize that link, but it is my LinkedIn blog site. I wrote something back in October about my assessment of where cloud adoption and enterprise data center ownership and colo adoption, et cetera, would go over the next 5 years. You can laugh at it. You can tell me I'm great. You can do whatever you want, but it's just my assessment based on my experience and my knowledge of the industry. So whether to build. Each of us have different reasons, right? We've talked about those. And those reasons could be anything from security to job safety to real benefit for the enterprise based on how your enterprise needs or uses data center capacity. And realistically, that middle point is the most important one, right? The only real reason that matters is the one that's important to your business. And business strategy should be the driver, not technology or desire, right? All of us love the next shiny thing, whether the next shiny thing is a giant air conditioning unit or the best server or the coolest software. All of us love the next shiny thing, but the next shiny thing should come after we understand the why from our enterprise. So, in the end, really, can you look in the mirror? If you can't, as an enterprise data center owner, if you can't go home and look in the mirror and say, I'm doing the right thing with 10, 20, 100, $500 million worth of enterprise dollars, if I'm not positioning the business for success, then you need to make a change. Thank you very much.